The carbon cycle and decomposition. What does the carbon cycle show? How carbon is recycled. What does photosynthesis plants do to carbon? Converts carbon from CO2 into sugar. How is carbon passed along into animals? When animals eat plants along a food chain. How do plants and animals release CO2? Respiration, death and decay, burning fossil fuels. Why does recycling carbon take longer in waterlogged soil than in well-drained soil? The bacteria and fungi decompose organic material taken in the oxygen to respire and produce energy, but waterlogged soil doesn't have much oxygen. Why does nutrient recycling take longer in highly acidic soils than in neutral soils? Because extremes of pH slow down or kill the reproduction of decomposers. What do millions of species of marine organisms make? Shells made of carbonates. What happens when these organisms die? The shells fall to the ocean floor and eventually form limestone rock. When does the carbon in the limestone return to the atmosphere? During volcanic eruption, when the rocks are weathered down. What is it called when oceans absorb large amounts of CO2? Carbon sinks. Adaptations. What does adaptations mean in terms of organisms? The features that organisms have that make them better suited for their environment. How are the organisms which have adapted to their environment more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their adaptation to their offspring? They are better able to compete for resources. What are specialists? Organisms which are highly adapted to survive in the specific habitat. What are generalists? Organisms which are adapted to survive in a range of different environments. What is extremophiles? Organisms that can tolerate extreme conditions. What are extremophile bacteria that live in hot environments? Enzymes that work best at a much higher optimum temperature than enzymes from other organisms. What do organisms that live in a very cold environment have? Special antifreeze proteins. What do these proteins do? Interfere with the formation and growth of ice crystals in the cells, stopping cell damage from ice. What are anatomical adaptations? Features of an organism's autonomy that help it survive. What examples of anatomical adaptations are there? Having thick coat or a layer of blubber to insulate the body and trap heat in. Having a large size and compact body shape to give a small surface area to volume ratio. Having counter-current heat exchange systems. What do the blood vessels going to and from the feet of a penguin carry? Blood that flows in opposite directions. What do the vessels that pass close to each other allow? Heat to transfer between them. What does the warm blood flow in arteries to the feet do? Heat cold blood returning to the heart in the veins. What does this mean? Feet stay cold but stops cold blood colonizing the rest of the body. Why do many species migrate to warmer climates during the winter? To avoid having to cope up with cold conditions. Why do some species hibernate during the winter months? To save energy. How do organisms keep cool in hot environments? Increasing heat loss and reducing heat gain. What behavioral adaptations do organisms use to increase heat loss and reduce heat gain? Stay in shade, active at night rather than day, bathing in water. What anatomical adaptations do organisms use to increase heat loss? Small size. Another way is large ears allows more blood to flow near the surface of the skin, meaning heat from the blood can be radiated to its surroundings. Or stored fat in one area allows heat to be lost more easily. Why do some desert plants have a round shape? To give them a small surface area to volume ratio to minimize water loss from surface. Why do some desert plants have a thick waxy layer and spines instead of leaves? To reduce water loss. Why do some desert plants store water in their stems? To survive droughts. Why do some desert plants have a shallow and extensive roots? To ensure water is absorbed quickly over a large area. Why do some desert animals have specialized kidneys? To produce concentrated urine. Why do some desert animals have no sweat glands? So there's no water loss through sweating. Why do some desert animals spend lots of time in underground burrows? Air is more moisture than on the surface. Classification and species. What is classification? Organizing living organisms into groups. What are natural classification systems? Classification based on the evolutionary relationships and genetic similarity between organisms. What are artificial classification systems? Classification based on parents rather than genes. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. What is a species? A group of organisms that can breed to produce fertile offspring. Why might the classification system change? New species not fitting into categories. Difference in DNA might be found. What does an evolutionary tree show? Common ancestors and relationships between species. How do scientists find out the evolutionary relationship between organisms? They analyze lots of different genes for different characteristics. What is asexual reproduction? Where an organism reproduces by making a copy of itself. Why does this not fit with the definition of species? There is no interbreeding with another organism. How do you get a hybrid? When a male of a species interbreeds with a female of another species. Why is it difficult to classify a hybrid? They're usually infertile, therefore they aren't a new species. How can evolution affect the classification of a species? Organisms change and evolve over time, therefore sometimes a group of organisms will form a new species. What does the binomial system do? gives each species a two-part name. What does the first part of the name refer to? Genus of the organism. What does the second part of the name refer to? Species of the organism. Why is the binomial name system used? So scientists around the world can refer to the particular species by the same name. Energy transfer and energy flow. What is photosynthesis? When plants use light to make food. What happens to the light energy when an animal consumes a plant? Some energy is lost as it's used for staying alive. What happens when another animal consumes this animal? They gain energy but lose energy from the life process. What is lost in the food chain as waste products? Materials and energy. What is egestion? When food that can't be digested is padded as feces. What is excretion? When the waste products of bodily processes are released. What is lost at each stage of the food chain? Material and energy. How do you work out the efficiency of energy transfer? Efficiency equals 100 times the energy available to the next level divided by energy that was available to the previous level. Evolution. What was the theory of natural selection? Survival of the fittest. What did Darwin know about organisms? There is a wide variation in a species. Organisms would compete for limited resources. What was Darwin's conclusion? That organisms that are best adapted would more likely survive. What were the organisms that survive likely to do? Reproduce and pass on their adaptations to offspring. What would happen after time? The species would change, meaning it would evolve. Why wasn't Darwin's theory perfect? Couldn't explain new characteristics, couldn't explain exactly how individual organisms passed on beneficial adaptations to their offspring. How long after Darwin's theory was published was DNA discovered? 50 years after. What are adaptations controlled by? Genes. What causes new adaptations? Mutations, brackets changes in DNA. What is speciation? When an organism changes over a long period of time due to natural selection forming a new species. When does speciation happen? When populations of the same species change enough to become reproductively isolated. What can reproductive isolation be caused by? Geographic isolation. Why didn't everyone agree with Darwin? Went against religious beliefs. Darwin couldn't explain his theory fully. Not enough evidence. What was Lamarck's idea of evolution? That animals would acquire characteristics then pass to their offsprings. Why is Darwin's theory widely accepted nowadays? theory hasn't been proved wrong, offers a plausible explanation. Energy transfer and energy flow. Why do species compete against each other for resources? To survive and reproduce. Why will similar organisms in the same habitat have the closest competition? They'll be competing for similar ecological niches. What is a species' ecological niche? How it fits into its ecosystem. What does this depend on? Where the individual lives, what they live on. What is intraspecific competition? Where organisms compete for resources against individual of another species. What is interspecific competition? Where organisms compete for resources against individual of the same species. Why do interspecific competition often have a bigger impact than interspecific? Individuals of the same species have exactly the same needs, meaning they'll compete for the same resources. What is the population of a species usually limited by? The amount of food available. What happens if the population of a prey increases? The predator's population increases. What happens when the population of predators increases? The prey population will decrease. Why are often predator-prey cycles out of phase? It takes a while for one population to respond to the other. What do parasites do? Live off hosts by taking what they need to survive without giving anything back. Do they harm the host? Usually. What is mutualism? A relationship where both organisms benefit. What percentage of the atmosphere is made of nitrogen? 78%. What do living organisms use nitrogen for? Making proteins for growth. How do plants obtain nitrogen? The nitrogen turns to nitrates in the soil, which are absorbed from the plant. What do decomposers make after breaking down proteins in rotting animals and plants and urea in animal waste? Ammonia. What is nitrogen fixation? The process of turning nitrogen from the air into nitrogen compounds in the soil. What ways does this happen? Energy from lightning is enough to make nitrogen react with oxygen to give nitrates, nitrogen fixing bacteria in roots and cells. What are the 4 different types of bacteria involved in the nitrogen cycle called? Decomposers, nitrifying bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, denitrifying bacteria. What do decomposers do? Decompose proteins and urea and turn them into ammonia. What do nitrifying bacteria do? Turns ammonia in decaying matter into nitrates. What do nitrogen fixing bacteria do? Turns atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen compounds which plants can use. What do denitrifying bacteria do? turns nitrates back into nitrogen gas? How do the plants have a mutualistic relationship with bacteria? The bacteria gets food from the plant and the plant gets nitrogen compounds to make proteins. Human impact on the environment. When does the population increase? When the birth rate is higher than the death rate. How is the increasing population putting pressure on environment? More resources are being used, more pollution is being produced. What happens when you burn fossil fuels? They release lots of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. They're greenhouse gases, by the way. What is the carbon footprint? The amount of greenhouse gases given off a certain period of time. What is formed when the sulfur dioxide reacts with water? Acid rain. What does limestone damage or kill? Fish, limestone buildings, trees and plants. What did CFCs used to be used for? Aerosols, fridges, air conditioning units, polystyrene foam. What do they break down? Ozone in the upper atmosphere. What does this lead to? More harmful UV rays reaching Earth's surface. What are indicator species used for? To show if an area is polluted. What are lichens used for? To monitor air quality. The cleaner the air, the more lichens. What are mayfly larvae used for? To monitor water quality. They can't survive in polluted water. What species showed that the water is polluted? Water lice, sludge works, rat-tailed maggots. What are the advantages of using living methods for measuring the pollution level? Quick, cheap, and easy. What are the disadvantages of using living methods for measuring the pollution level? Not always reliable, as other factors could affect the indicator species. What are the advantages of using non-living methods for measuring the pollution level? Reliable numerical data. Pollutants can be identified. What are the disadvantages of using non-living methods for measuring the pollution level? Expensive equipment needed. Trained workers needed. Endangered species. What are the factors of a species being at risk of extinction? The number of habitats, the number of individuals, the genetic variation. How do you tell if a conservation program is successful? By its genetic variation, viability of populations, available habitat, and interaction between species. How do you tell if a conservation program is successful with genetic variation? Species should be able to cope with environment changes and new diseases. How do you tell if a conservation program is successful with viability of populations? Populations should be large enough to breed, shouldn't have to breed related individuals. What is inbreeding and what does it do? Breeding related individuals, which reduces genetic variation. How do you tell if a conservation program is successful with the number of available habitats? Should be suitable habitat, should be enough room. How do you tell if a conservation program is successful work interaction between species? Species interact like they do in the natural world. How do conservation programs benefit humans? Protecting the human food supply, ensuring minimal damage to food chains, providing future medicines and cultural aspects. How do conservation programs protect food supply? Ensures future generations of fish. How do conservation programs ensure minimal damage to food chains? Conserving a species to help other species survive. How do conservation programs provide future medicines? Preventing plants from going extinct. How do conservation programs help cultural aspects? Importation of species. Sustainable development. As the human population increases, what do we need? More food and water, more energy and more shelter. What is sustainable development? Providing the needs of today without harming the environment. Why do whales have commercial value? Tourist attraction and whale meat and oil. Why have the International Whaling Commissions tried to restrict whaling? Whaling species are becoming endangered. What are the pros and cons of whale captivity? Cons: whales don't have much space or freedom. Pros: whales entertain people. Captive breeding program can increase whale population.